I want to start this video by asking you a question. I asked myself this question a few years ago and I believe this is what saved me. Just think about this for a minute, maybe pause the video or close your eyes. And I want to truly ask you, what scares you more? You putting yourself out there and trying to talk to other people, or you being in exactly the same place you are now with your social anxiety in 5 years' time? And really think about this, okay? Is it more scary to put yourself out there with the slight chance of embarrassing yourself from here to there, because we all do, because we're all humans? Or is it more scary for in 5 years' time, you are in the exact same place? I'm guessing if you're someone who clicked on this video, you feel paralyzed with your social anxiety. Maybe you find it hard to make friends. Maybe you can barely leave your bedroom because you're scared to talk to people. Maybe you've avoided getting jobs. You feel trapped and stuck and you don't know what to do because every time you try, you feel like it's too overwhelming. You're watching on Instagram how everyone around you is just living their life and it feels like life is just passing you by and you're just at home staying the same. How would you truly feel knowing that that feeling that you feel right now, you would still be in that same position in 5 years' time? I know that when I asked myself that question a few years ago, it scared the hell out of me. Although I did feel so trapped and stuck, the thought of wasting my life away in my bedroom, so scared to do anything, watching life pass me by, scared me so much more than the possibility of even trying. And trust me, this is not an easy journey to face. It is hard work and it does mean facing your fears. But you know what's even harder? What's even harder is being trapped by your mind, by your social anxiety. And if this question also scared you, I hope you're at least willing to try. I literally couldn't order in restaurants. I couldn't speak to anybody. I'd go into a shop and if I needed to find something, I'd leave the shop because I didn't even want to ask anybody. I'd avoid going out. I didn't want to go to social gatherings, and friends would invite me to go to big groups. I literally would feel sick in my stomach. And so in this video, I've put together some key points of how I cured my social anxiety and what I believe could really help you too. So the first point is, what is the story that you tell yourself every day? How we see ourselves and the beliefs that we hold about ourselves impact how we then show up in the world. And our beliefs are often shaped by the experiences we have had in life, through our childhood, through our experiences with friends, with families, with society, with the environments that we are in. These all have a factor in shaping how we think about ourselves. The beliefs we hold for ourselves define what we think we're capable of and what we also think we're not capable of. So let me give you a personal story. When I was around 15, I struggled a lot with depression and anxiety, and this resulted in me ending up in a psychiatric hospital. To cut the long story short, I ended up in hospital for 4 years, which obviously is a drastic amount of time. And when I got out, I can safely say that my people skills were probably at an all-time low. Obviously, I'd not really been in the real world. I'd not had exposure to many things, many people, and so I felt like I couldn't really even speak to anybody. 2 years after being discharged and trying to build my life back up, I decided at age 21 I was going to book to go on an all-women's retreat. So this was a retreat in Spain where there was 30 random women from all across the world. But honestly, this was something still so out of my comfort zone because my social anxiety was so high. I honestly spent the week leading up to my flight feeling so sick because I just felt so nervous. And you know what I was doing? I was preparing in my head, you know those icebreakers that you have in school, or maybe that you sometimes experience in a new job when people are like, oh, let's go around and say 2 truths and a lie about ourselves. My mind started to try and think about all these answers to icebreakers. My anxiety was preparing for what was going to happen because I was so worried about being put on the spot. I was so worried about having to speak in front of all these people. Anyway, when I arrived on the first night, we did have to one by one go around and speak in a group. And I honestly don't even know how I got through it. I think I looked at the floor and I was sweating. My heart was beating through my throat, not even my chest. It moved to my throat. And so a few days into the retreat, I was really struggling. Honestly, I was so overwhelmed. Every single morning I felt sick. I could barely eat the food because I was just so anxious. And so I said to myself, you know what? I might have to leave. And so I asked the host if I could speak to her, and we had a very eye-opening conversation. I said to her, I'm thinking about leaving because I just feel so anxious, and when we were going round speaking one by one, I could barely even hear what everyone was saying because I was just so anxious about my turn. And the first thing she said was, oh, I didn't even realize you were anxious. And in my head I was kind of surprised. I was like, oh, okay, I thought that everyone could probably see it. I thought it was very obvious. And I told her a bit about my story and what had happened to me and why I felt so anxious and that I was just an anxious person. And then she said something that's always stuck with me. She said, Heather, you realise nobody knows you here. You literally have the opportunity to be somebody new if you wanted to. And it kind of just hit me that the anxious Heather that I saw as shy and unconfident, if she wanted to, could be somebody new. Like, I'm around total strangers who don't know me at all. I could use this opportunity to be somebody different. But what was the story that I was telling myself? The story that I was telling myself is that I'm an awkward and anxious person. And automatically, because of those beliefs, I was acting like that type of person. Before I even had arrived at the retreat, I already had subconsciously predicted how I was going to act because that's what I believed of who I was. Somewhere along the way, as we grew up, we started to see ourselves in a certain way and identify certain words to ourselves. Maybe it's words like anxious, unconfident, shy, awkward, because you believe that is who you are at your core, not knowing that we actually have the power to choose to be different. Let's take another example. Let's say there's a guy called Jim, and Jim grew up super shy. In school he did well, but he was always a bit of a quiet kid. When he was a teenager, when all the other kids and guys were going out, he preferred to stay home and play video games. By the time Jim became an adult, he didn't have much confidence and he felt like he couldn't talk to girls. Jim saw himself as unconfident, shy, and anxious. One day, Jim was in a cafe and he saw a woman looking at him. Before Jim had even left the house today, Jim was already gonna subconsciously act in certain ways because that's how Jim is. Jim doesn't talk to girls. Jim's shy, Jim's anxious, Jim's unconfident. And so what happens in this moment in the cafe? The woman gets up and leaves. And now the opportunity that Jim did have is gone. Now, is it possible in this situation that Jim could have acted differently? Yes. Could Jim have gone up to the woman and said hi? Yes, he could have chosen to do that. Maybe it would have come out wrong. Maybe he would have stuttered. Maybe he would be super anxious because he's unpracticed. But could he have acted differently? Yes, he could have. But because of the story that Jim told himself about who he was, he continued to act in certain ways. And it didn't even come into his mind that speaking to that woman was a possibility. So what is the story that you tell yourself every day about who you are? Write down a few words of how you see yourself and try and recognize how these beliefs might be affecting how you show up in your own life. In order to face our social anxiety and start building up our confidence, we need to start expanding our comfort zone. I always thought I had to throw myself into big social gatherings, into going to parties with people, or maybe start a hobby in a club where there's loads of other people. But actually sometimes that was so overwhelming for me and that wasn't the right way to start. So look at this image right here and you can see that you are here in the center and this is your zone of comfort. Maybe that's staying in your bedroom, not going out much, kind of avoiding social situations because that's what's comfortable to you right now. And what we have to do is start taking little risks again and again and again, and eventually our comfort zone expands and we are now in a new zone of comfort. So let's say your anxiety was as bad as mine was, where I couldn't even speak to a shopkeeper. The first step is literally to get comfortable with just saying hi to a shopkeeper or asking a random question. One by one, we start tackling those little fears and doing that repeatedly, and before we know it, it gets easier. Let's take the example of Jim again, who's scared to talk to girls. Jim's first step doesn't have to be to go up to a woman and ask for her number. Jim's first step should just be getting used to talk to people, to just build up his people skills and his confidence. Step by step, Jim is going to take small risks again and again and again, and this in time will expand his comfort zone until those risks are no longer risks anymore because he's so used to doing them that they become comfortable for him. So for social anxiety, what's one of the best risks that we can do again and again? It's speak to strangers as often as possible. Honestly, I want you to think of every stranger as a moment of opportunity. You can literally use every small moment in your day as an opportunity to build up your people skills. Speak to the waiter, speak to the taxi and the Uber driver, speak to the barista, speak to the shopkeeper. And I honestly think it is easier to practice with strangers because you don't know them. 99% of the time, you're never going to see them again. And I know right now it might seem such a big deal to speak to strangers, but I want you to think back to the question I asked you at the start. What's more scary? Is it more scary to ask a stranger a question? Your voice might be quivering and you might feel anxious and you might be so scared. Is that more scary? That moment, which is going to pass? Or is it more scary to still be in the same position you are in years to come? You have to keep referring back to that question. And so yeah, use these opportunities. Honestly, make up questions. Just ask the Uber driver, how was your day today? You can literally make it as simple or as long as you want. It might feel a bit weird at first to just speak to random people and maybe you make some questions up, but honestly, who cares, because it works. Use those small micro moments when you're in the shop or whatever to just use that moment to just get comfortable with having a bit of a conversation with someone. And that consistent exposure exposure to people will help you to build your confidence, and the anxiety will become quieter. Like I said, I literally could not speak to a shopkeeper. I used to get my mom and my dad to order stuff for me when we went into the restaurant because I was too scared to speak, and now I could literally go up to a stranger on the street if I wanted to. So this process honestly does work. Now the next point is that you have to be your own cheerleader and best friend. At the end of the day, it's only you who's going to be making these changes, who's going to be facing your fears. Nobody else can force you. Nobody can force you to go and speak to people. It's your choice. And like we said at the start, if you don't want to spend your life being trapped by anxiety, watching people on Instagram and you're jealous of them because you wish that your life was like them, then you have to push yourself to do this. And because of that, you do have to learn to be a positive voice for yourself and be your own cheerleader. Many of us speak to ourselves very negatively in our heads. Let's take an example of, say someone is anxious to go to a cafe by themselves and they feel like people are going to look at them or judge them, and they feel super self-conscious. They're going to take one of those risks outside of their comfort zone and try and go to the cafe for 30 minutes. But what happens is they get there, and within 5 minutes of ordering their coffee, they just feel so overwhelmed and so fearful that they decide they just want to leave and go back home. And then what happens in their head? That negative voice comes in. See, you can't do this type of thing. You're so anxious, you're so awkward, and you failed. You're never going to be able to speak to anybody. You're never going to be able to do this. All the negative inner dialogue. And so what we have to do is we have to stop feeding those negative thoughts. When you hear those negative sentences in your head, I want you to see it as a separate voice from yourself. That is the anxiety talking to you. So when you hear those sentences, I want you to label it as anxiety. We think that every thought we think in our head is us and is the truth, but it's not. The mind literally has a mind of its own. Just think about how many times have you made up scenarios in your head? How many times have you worried about something and then in the end it never happened? And that's because the mind cannot always be trusted. The mind does not always tell the truth. So the negative thoughts that are coming into your head, we don't actually have to feed them and identify with them. So the next time that you maybe challenge yourself and it doesn't go as planned, when you get that negative self-talk in your head, I want you to start labeling it as anxiety and start realizing, okay, this is my anxiety speaking to me. What we're going to try and do is use compassion and kindness to counteract this negativity. Now, this is hard for many people because it's something foreign. A lot of us don't know how to have kindness and compassion to ourselves, and it can feel a bit embarrassing. It can feel cringe, and I get it. I was the same. I understand. But trust me, over time, it will become easier and it will become less foreign to you. So we have to try fighting those negative thoughts with positive thoughts. So when your head says, oh, you're so stupid, you couldn't even get in that cafe today, you literally only lasted 5 minutes and got a coffee and walked out. We first think, okay, that thought is rather negative. Okay, that's my anxiety trying to make me feel bad. But actually, I was so scared to go to that cafe today, and I even got in the door and I ordered a coffee, and that's such a good step for me. And you know what? It didn't go as planned, and I am feeling quite disappointed right now. But tomorrow, I'm going to try again. You don't even have to be like, oh my God, I love myself so much. Oh my God, I did so well. You don't even have to go that far. You just have to be neutral. Just take out your negative emotion and actually be like, you know what? I did well. This is where I'm at. I'm disappointed, but tomorrow I'm going to try again. And so this is why I say you have to be your own cheerleader, because I respect anyone who faces a fear, because fears are hard to face and it takes a lot of courage and bravery. But you know what's even harder? It's even harder when you have a bully in your head. It's even harder when you have someone trying to drag you down. Can you imagine someone trying to do something that's so scary and someone is on the sidelines saying, you're a loser, you're never going to be able to do it, you're not good enough. It's going to be so much harder for that person to do that than if that person was to have someone who was bringing them up, being a cheerleader, being like, you know what, you can do it. You know what, even if you don't do it, you're going to be better at it tomorrow. Don't let that anxiety in your head bully you. Start recognizing when it is speaking to you and start questioning it. Start labeling it so you see it as separate from yourself. This is not you talking to you. This is your anxiety talking to you. And as we've clarified, the mind does not always tell the truth. And truthfully, there will be times when you fail. There will be times when things go wrong. There will be times when maybe you do embarrass yourself a little bit. Trust me, I am the embarrassing queen. If I could tell you everything I've done that is embarrassing, this would be the longest video on YouTube. There will be times when you get anxious and you leave the situation, but that's okay because you're human. You have to forgive yourself, let it go, and tomorrow try again. So my last point, with all these methods, what we are trying to do is build evidence against your anxiety. So if we break down where does social anxiety actually come from, it is often low self-esteem of how we feel about ourselves. Going back to the story story we tell ourselves at the start. What happens is, as we're growing up, we have these experiences, and somewhere along the way we start to adapt these beliefs about ourselves. And so then what happens is we start to project those beliefs about ourselves into other people. Let's take the example of Jim asking a girl for his number. He thinks that that girl is going to laugh at him and think that he's stupid. But where are those thoughts actually coming from? They're coming from Jim's mind based on his past experiences and perceptions. Those thoughts aren't actually the truth, or they're not actually based in reality, because the truth is that we don't actually know what that girl's gonna think. We don't know if she's gonna laugh. We don't know if she's gonna think he's stupid. We're not mind readers. And so what we do is we project the beliefs that we have about ourselves into other people. We imagine that that's what they're gonna think, when in reality we don't know. So by expanding our comfort zone step by step, we start to build up evidence that these thoughts that we have about what we think other people might be thinking about us are actually simply not true or based in reality. Like I said before, 99% of the worries that we have never come true. And so it's the same with social anxiety. We are scared to put ourselves out there because we think that person's going to laugh at us or judge us. When in reality, that actually barely happens. And every time we then put ourselves out there and build up that evidence in our mind to show that these thoughts aren't true, our anxiety starts to get quieter. And one thing you'll learn is that everybody else is so wrapped up in their own minds that they're not thinking about you. And this is a very humbling and freeing thing to feel, because it means that everything you're scared to do, whether it's go to a cafe by yourself, go to a restaurant, go to a different country, you'll realize that no one actually really cares, because everyone is too busy wrapped up caring about themselves. And the thing is, it's all good to say nobody is thinking about you, but I know when I was at my peak of anxiety and anyone said that to me, it didn't really help. Of course it didn't. Because logically, yeah, okay, I knew people weren't looking at me or thinking about me, but in that moment I felt anxious and I felt self-conscious, and that logical thought didn't help. And the only way I actually learned that no one was thinking about me is through doing things, is through acting, taking those small risks and realizing, building up that evidence that actually no one is thinking about you. No one is really judging you. Of course, some people may from time to time, but it really is such a small percentage. And when you do all these steps, this is when you'll start to realize and experience true freedom and peace of mind, because over time your anxiety will get quieter and quieter. Those thoughts won't be as persistent when you've now shown yourself that people don't care and you're able to do whatever you want because you've expanded your comfort zone. If you had honestly told me years ago it's possible to live a life without social anxiety, I'm not sure if I would have believed you, because it honestly controlled me. But it is true, and it is so worth it. Just imagine a life where you feel confident to go up to speak to anybody. You're confident enough to do things by yourself and just totally enjoy your life and not spend so much of your energy in your head worrying about pointless things. It's all so worth it, and it all starts by you taking one small risk. Lastly, I do recommend reading the book Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers, as this book honestly taught me so much. All of the points I've put together in this video is what has truly helped me to have peace of mind and freedom from social anxiety, and I really hope that for you too. I hope this video could have helped in some way, and thank you for listening.